I'm thrilled today to be interviewing Rich Harwood of the Harwood Institute. I followed his career for many years. He has a distinguished career after working on 20 political campaigns early on in life. He started the Richard Harwood Institute, I believe, at the age of 27.
Ripe age.
Okay, and as I read his bio, we're of this very similar age. He's been doing this a lot longer than I have. I just entered the democracy reform, healthy democracy movement about 15 years. But welcome, Rich. I'm so glad to have you impart your wisdom upon the City Biz audience. They're going to be
Hey,
thrilled.
David, it's great to be with you. Listen, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to say thank you, not just for co-founding the Bridge Alliance, not just for allowing me to be a contributor to the Fulcrum, which I love, the online news source, but also because you endowed the Nevins Fellowship at Penn State University. And a number of years ago, we had this incredible young man, Jack Ula, on and worked with the Institute, and all because of the Nevins Fellowship. So I love Jack. He was a great guy, great kid. He's now an adult. He's at Rutgers, but thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for those kind words. Perhaps in the next month you can interview me, but this was all about you, Rich, and I appreciate the kind words. But maybe a great way to start, and then we'll get into a little history of the Institute. What brought me to you in recent times is your recent campaign. I believe you're traveling the country, called Enough Time to Build. Do you want to tell our City Biz audience a little about that? That'd be great.
Yeah, I came to a belief that our politics, as you know, the loudest and most divisive voices are dominating our public square. What we're finding in our on-the-ground work across the country is that more and more community leaders and active citizens are retreating because of their fear of being taken over by these loud and divisive voices. And David, we started this because we wanted to call them back because, look, I don't think that we need more divisive politics to get our country moving. I think we need a new civic path. And so this campaign is about going across the country and re-engaging Americans about our need to come together and create a new civic path. And as you know well, all the great change in American history always started in our local communities. It didn't start in Washington, D.C. or our state capitals. It started in our local communities. And I think we've got to recommit ourselves to that again. We've got to call ourselves back to that again. And we have to demonstrate that it's possible again.
Well, I'm always amazed how you keep your optimism. These are difficult and very divisive times in our country. As you've traveled the country this year, actually, how many cities have you been in so far?
Oh gosh, scores. And look, one of the ways in which I maintain my optimism, or I would say my deep sense of hope and civic faith, is, well, most campaigns, and I worked on a lot of political campaigns, they go to the places where they have strongholds in terms of voters, in this case, red or blue states. This campaign is probably the only national campaign that's been invited to communities all across the spectrum. So I've been in Matt Gaetz's congressional district in Pensacola. I've been in Ken Buck's congressional district in Colorado. I've been in Jim Jordan's congressional district, the co-founder of the Freedom Caucus, in Ohio. I've been to Flint, Michigan, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Alamance County, North Carolina, all across the country. And what it tells me is not that I'm a good speaker or that something about this campaign is unique. It tells me that there's a hunger in the country to get beyond politics, to get back on a new civic path, and to get the country moving again and restore our sense of possibility and hope. So that's actually where I get my optimism from.
Well, that reminds me of a little story from my past when you mentioned the diversity and the political spectrum in the districts that you followed. Real briefly, I was involved in something called the Next Generation campaign quite a few years ago when we spoke to members of state legislators from the left and the right. And they started off the facilitator started off the interactions by not talking about issues, not talking about immigration, not talking about money in politics or whatever, by asking them what brought them to public
Exactly.
service. And when they found that common bond, that common humanity, it really helped break the ground. Have you found that in your experience, that maybe focusing on what we have more in common than what separates us
Yeah,
is
let me give you a concrete example, which actually we wrote about in the Fulcrum. Reading, Pennsylvania, 10, 12 years ago, declared the poorest community in America, was predominantly white, is now 65, 70% Latino. It's more diverse today than ever before because folks come from 5 to 7 different countries. And as you know, they have different dialects, histories, heritage, customs, traditions. At the height of the culture war over education, about banning books, about DEI, about critical race theory, about whether or not we should, the effects of masks in schools, we started to work with Reading on a community-led, community-driven education agenda. And everyone said, no, no, Rich, can't be done. You can't go there. The culture wars are going to take over like they have in so many communities. And David, we didn't begin with what's your position on banning books, or what do you think about critical race theory, or certain hot button issues. We asked people, what are your aspirations for your lives and your community? And what do you want for your kids moving forward? And not only did they come together, they produced a 9-point educational equity agenda
no,
at the height of the culture wars. But not only that, folks came out of the woodwork and joined our Public Innovators Lab to start to work on 3 concrete agenda items. Not only that, they've been at it for 2 years now, and they're transforming after school and out of school activities in the community. They're transforming English as a second language work in the community. They're transforming early education. But here's the thing that I'm probably most proud of in terms of what they've achieved. It's not the programmatic or strategy results. It's the fact that they have fundamentally shifted their civic culture from not having any sense of shared purpose to an emerging sense of shared purpose, of not getting together and having a habit of public discussion to now creating a habit of public discussion, of not having any leaders or organizations that people trust to now having an abundance of them, to not having, yeah, they had collaborations before, they got together, but they didn't work together. Now they're working together. So another point of why I'm so optimistic about the future of the country, if it can happen in Reading, it can happen anywhere. And it's happening in Reading.
Oh, that's fascinating. Given that you've been doing this so long, I always, and I have probably been doing it half as long as you
Listen,
have.
man, you're making me feel old here.
Well, I think we're about the same age, frankly. But rather than get into that, um, um, so I try to think long term. We're not going to, create a healthy self-governance and solve the cultural divide that's separating us overnight.
No.
But because of where we're at today and the upcoming election in November, has any of your focus changed? Are you focusing on anything different between now and November, between now and January, or you're still on pretty much the same path, or a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I think, look, we shifted part of the Institute. We have a 3-part strategy at the Institute. We shifted one part of it. Our work was spreading, our work, David, is spread to all 50 states and 40 countries. And I just returned from Israel. And I was just on the phone with Israel this week because we're forming a partnership with one of the larger civil society groups there. But we, back then in 2019, in October, we said, the fault lines in America are growing, and we need to shift our strategy to come home and work almost like we did 20 years ago, really deeply in just a small number of communities, a handful, maybe 7, 8, each of which represent different fault lines, but collectively represent the mosaic, the country. And we want to demonstrate that we Americans have the wherewithal, the public will, the knowledge, the courage, humility to get together and create progress at times of great division. So that strategy didn't change in 2024 or even 2023. It changed in 2019. And that's part of what we're pursuing. The other part is that we launched this campaign because we believe that while that deep work was necessary, we needed to call people back to public life and give them a sense of cover that, yes, we can come out from retreat and re-engage together and we can make a difference. And and we can create this new civic path and activate more change in local communities. And so it's both those things that change for us.
Fascinating. Maybe you could give some advice to some of our city biz audience. It's a very varied audience. A lot of folks are not involved in politics at all. They might be business folks, family people. How can someone get involved? If someone's inspired by your optimism and your vision today, but they've never done anything, what would you suggest? How do they start to get civically engaged?
Here's the thing. You asked, do people care about politics, David? And the thing is that it's not about politics. If I went and asked the folks who listen to your podcast, do you care about clean water? Do you care about whether or not kids get a good education in your community? Do you care about the safety of people walking down the street? Do you care about seniors who maybe are shut in and feel lonely, the epidemic that the Surgeon General keeps talking about in terms of loneliness? So many of us would say yes to at least one of those concerns, if not a number of them. And there are all sorts of ways, if you're concerned about those things, to find groups to work with in local communities. Let's take Reading, Pennsylvania again. In Reading, we have this collaborative on English as a second language. Lo and behold, there are folks from the faith community, from the business community, as you were mentioning, from educators all across the community. But here's the thing. Not too long ago, this woman named Sister Kara, of all people, she's about 4'2", had created an app, an app for a smartphone, so that people can track their progress in learning English on their phone because there weren't enough ESL slots in the community at the time. She said, I've got this app, but I don't have anywhere to disseminate. But she heard about this effort that we're doing. And she went and talked to folks about it. And they said, Sister, we've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you. Come on in, let's work together. And they piloted the app and they've demonstrated that it works. They've got data to demonstrate that it works exceedingly well. And so now Sister Care, of all people, is an instrumental part of this English as a second language collaborative in Reading moving forward. There's a place for each of us in our communities. There's room for each of us in our communities. You know, last thing I'll say about this, in my faith, like in a lot of faiths, there's a teaching that goes something like, if you save one life, you save the world. And we know you don't save the world, but why do we teach it then? And I think we teach it because it shows that we believe in the sacredness of life, of each life, that we teach it because it means that you've stepped forward and made yourself visible. We teach it because it means that maybe you've reached out to someone who's different from yourself. We teach it because if you save one life, maybe it reignites the light in someone else to step forward and come forward with us and do work together. We say it because not every effort that we make has to be big. Some of the efforts that we make are small and they're worthwhile and of value. And I think one of the things we need to do in America today, again, is to say, look, every effort we take is not going to be big and shiny. Every effort we take is not going to be expensive. Every effort we take is not going to be judged based on its complexity or sophistication. But that if each of us step forward in our own way, at our own pace, with other folks in our community, we can unleash a chain reaction of actions that grow and spread all across our community and ultimately across the country. That's what I think we need to get back to in America.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here. You know, I get people telling me all the time that I'm wasting my time, that, you know, there's too much money in politics and corruption, and David, you'll never make any change. And I have a standard response to them, maybe similar to your thinking, that I can't say that anything I'm going to do is going to result in change. But I can say one thing with 100% certainty. If no one tries, change will never happen. So I think that's in line with what you're saying. There's no promises, but every one of us can contribute. In terms of your strategy, there was a term I read. I'm going to have to look at my notes. I think it said turning outward. Is that the right? Yes. Yeah. Could you tell our listeners, our City Biz listeners, what that means and how that relates to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I'm really interested in is how do we strengthen the civic culture of communities? Because I believe that our civic culture, the networks, norms, relationships, leaders, is the biggest predictor of whether or not communities move forward and whether or not society actually moves forward. At the heart of that is whether or not each of us in doing this work is turned outward toward our communities as the reference point for what we're doing, or we're turned inward. And that sounds like an obvious thing, except we've done millions of dollars of research on this that demonstrates that actually most of us are turned inward, even when we think we're turned outward. We're consumed by our own strategies, our own metrics, our own fundraising, our own boards, all important, but they don't replace or substitute the need to understand what really matters to people, the context of our communities, and how change happens. So in our work, we actually have a school called the Harwood School, where we've been teaching people all across the United States and in other countries the mindset of how do you turn outward. It's a mindset, a posture, an orientation, first and foremost. And second, a set of practices that enable people to address what really matters to folks in their community and to strengthen the civic culture of the community at the very same time, and to unleash a chain reaction of actions, and in doing so, make a difference in people's lives. And here's the other important thing to our conversation today: actually deepen our sense of civic faith, our sense of belief that we can actually come together and get things done and make a difference in our lives, in our communities, and in the world.
Well, that is truly inspirational. Hopefully, our audience will take heed and listen to those words of wisdom. I'm running out of time, but I want to ask you a personal question. When you were a younger man growing up, is there anything in your childhood that could have foretold this direction in your life? I mean, were you naturally a finding common ground, bridging person? Is there any personal experience that you can think of that's highly responsible for the direction your life has taken?
Yeah, I think probably the foremost thing is that when I was born, I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. In 1960, that was a death sentence. My parents were told I had 3 to 5 years to live, and they went on a death watch. At one point, the doctors turned to my mom and said, "Face it, he's a lemon." I grew up much of my youth in hospital beds, and I have vivid memories of all the doctors and nurses and specialists all talking about me, surrounding my bed, but never talking with me. I learned firsthand, David, what it feels like to be invisible, to feel not seen and heard. I was manhandled and violated repeatedly through tests. So I learned firsthand what it feels like to have your dignity stripped from you. And that, along with being a person of faith, with a number of other things, really propelled me to, and my family, my parents were involved actively in our community, but all of those things together almost conspired to propel me to do this work. I think there are too many people in our society who don't feel seen and heard. There are too many people who feel invisible. There are too many people who feel that they've been left out and left behind. There are too many people who we give lip service to about dignity, but we don't really uphold it, really, not on a daily basis. And so for all the things I can talk to you about our strategies, all the things I can talk to you about our programs and our school and all that kind of stuff, what I come back to every single day, literally, is this feeling that has never left me about what it feels like to be that young kid yearning for a sense of possibility and hope. Because I learned that for much of my life, tomorrow was not going to be better than today. It was going to be worse. And so I really wanted to figure out what would give people, engender within us, a sense of hope that tomorrow actually can be better than today. So that's what really motivates me each and every day.
Well, that's moving to say the least, and the perfect ending perhaps to a remarkable interview. I mean, you're certainly not invisible now, and hopefully that'll give inspiration to the many folks who feel they don't have a voice and are underrepresented, that they can, through strength and perseverance, really make a difference. So it's been an honor. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.